Okay. All right. So hopefully, there it's coding. All right. So the second half, yeah, after the video, it should be recorded by now. Okay. So let me go back to the. Okay. Uh, this is not the one. Is this? That one. Let me move on to this the correct slide. Slide number. Okay, this is the. Just quickly, maybe in about half an hour or so, on the effects of globalization on development. Um, all right, so I don't know. I haven't discussed this with you on the theory of comparative advantage. Actually, that is the thing about globalization. So when people trade with each other, trading was done on the basis of comparative advantage. Yeah. So countries that are good at producing certain goods, or the particular good are better of exporting it to countries that are less efficient at producing the good. For example, cars, ya, kereta, dan sebagainya. So all the countries which are good at doing it will export those goods. So not every country in the world actually are good in that kind of industry. Yeah. So this concept makes production more efficient, yeah, because of your specialization, and it promotes economic growth, definitely, yeah, for the country, brings in income, yeah, foreign exchange and all that. It lowers prices of goods and services because of that specialization and also mass production of it, making them more affordable, especially for lower income household. That's the benefit, yeah, of it. And also in terms of trade, yeah, globalization increased trade, which is a key to improving productivity in any country for that matter. So as global trade has slowed, the growth rate of productivity also was declining, yeah, in the world since the global financial crisis. So we had several financial crises, and the recent one was in the 1990s, yeah, 1990s, yeah, the 90s. So that has affected um, trade and also in terms of productivity worldwide. And it's also can scale up businesses, yeah, where large markets enable companies to reach more customers, yeah. So increasing number of countries as market that will enable companies which produce goods, yeah, to reach more customers and get higher return, yeah, on the cost of doing business. Yeah? Okay, so costs including building factories and also doing research, those are costs. Yeah? So for example, technology firms have taken space of innovation, their innovation. And another advantage of effects of globalization is products have better quality as well as variety as well. Yeah. So this is because of competition from abroad, from different regions or countries that drives local firm to improve their products. Otherwise, they will be losing. Yeah, they'll be losing their market. And consumers also benefit by having better products and also more choices. Okay. Um, Also, in terms of innovation, um, globalization has contributed to greater innovation as well. We expanded trade spurs the spread of technology, innovation, and more communication of ideas. Yeah. All right. So the best ideas from market leaders will spread more easily. Yeah? So there is this innovation, yeah, continued innovation. And the other is the effect on job, yeah, on employment. Um, it seems that globalization affects jobs and also new job opportunities, but also at the same time, it can contribute to job displacement. In other words, if machine, for example, technology may replace human labor, that's where globalization has a negative impact. But at the same time, it also has positive impact by creating job opportunities. Okay, so it does not significantly change the total number of positions in the numbers are primarily driven by business cycles and also fiscal policies. But those who are affected most are the low-wage workers or the general workers in certain regions. Yeah? So many of them face lower earnings or have been dropped out of the workforce as a result of technological development as well. Okay. Other factors that drives job displacements are labor saving technologies, teknologi ataupun mesin tadi, which replace labor. Okay, so yeah, and also artificial intelligence. So better paying positions have also opened up in manufactured exports, especially in high tech areas. Yeah, and such as computers, chemical, and transportation equipment, and also other high skill work. So that's in other words, there have been changes in terms of jobs and also the nature of jobs. Yeah, and not less or no less also in terms of its impact on the skills required. Um, and then also there is a decline in the gap between. This is more like a positive thing, like yeah, decline in the gap between the poor. Supposed to be yeah as a result of globalization, as a result of capitalism, as a result of industrialization, yeah, globally, but wider inequality within. So in other words, there has been increasing or decreasing gap between the rich and the poor countries. But within the country, within a certain country, there seems to be a wider gap between the rich and the poor in the country. That's what I said. So globalization has helped narrow inequality between poorest and richest people in the world, with the number living in extreme poverty has been cut by half. So in other words, it has contributed that China alone, for example, has managed to lift about 600 million people out of poverty since the Chinese Revolution, since um, they have opened up their market and so on. Yeah? Yeah, but within many countries, including the United States, also inequality is rising. So we're talking about within, yeah, dalam negara, sebuah negara. Yeah. Technology, therefore, is helping to reduce the demand for certain low and middle-aged workers, and at the same time, increasing demand for higher paid workers. So um, it is positive for those who have the skill and high paid workers, but the demand for low skill and low wage workers has been reduced. Yeah, as a result of technology. Also, globalization has displaced some workers who are supporting high skill job. The point that I made earlier on. Yeah, changes in the types of job available, but has little effect on the overall number of jobs lah. So just that job churn tadi, yeah, the different emerge, you know. Right? So some workers have directly benefited from the expanding global commerce, while others have, at the same time, certain manufacturing and industry workers in certain regions of the world also have lost out, particularly low wage workers tadi lah. Okay, so the world is not flat. This is a famous saying, yeah. When before Columbus set to sail to what is now known as the America ataupun USA and also South America, uh, everybody thought that the world was flat, flat, yeah, not round. Anyway, the analogy has to do with the impact of globalization as well. Yeah. So in many ways, the world may be considered as less flat. Yeah. So how is it possible? I mean, this is just an analogy. Yeah. In other words, there is growing inequality between countries um, to reduce the gap. But I think some people said that there is because of the differences, because of the rate of the economy, globalization, and its impact happening at different rates, yeah, in different countries. So that contributed to the increasing inequalities. Yeah? Right? So it was thought actually that economies of our countries of the world will converge, yeah, will converge in terms of the in terms of economic or GDP and so on. Instead, it has more or less diverged yeah, more differences between nations. Also, growing inequality in most countries within those countries. Sorry, yeah. So, um, so the point here is that even with the flattening of the world, in other words, equality in the world, globalization works only for the privileged and denies the benefits to the majority. So, in other words, it has benefited the few, and the majority are not enjoying globalization or the impact of globalization. Right. So this is the counter argument to Friedman's hypothesis about how globalization is a win-win situation. Right. Okay. So this is, for example, just to show you um, on the impact of um, or rather the requirement for employment and also productions. So what you can see here is the production is increasing, but the number of employees is actually decreasing, right? So what accounts for this is the use of technology, actually. Yeah? So because of the use of technology, they are able to increase production despite the decrease in the number of employees. Yeah. Okay, what's up? So U.S. firm uh, often beat international competitors in supplying high-skilled workers. So workers in this field have benefited the most from globalization. And by the way, there are also a lot of high-skilled workers from India, from China in the past, yeah? But now those people are returning. Perhaps they don't migrate to US anymore because they do have their own industry in China. But in the past, there has been a lot of high-skilled people, particularly, for example, from India who moved to or migrate to US because they have the skill and there are employment opportunities for that. Right. So developing countries with less high-skilled workers therefore lose out in the competition. Okay. So why do we support globalization if it indeed displaces jobs? So kalau dia mengurangkan pekerjaan, so that is a valid argument lah for some developing countries actually. If it does displace jobs, in other words, people will not be employed. So for some of these countries, employment is the number one objective. In other words, for people in the country, yeah, to be able to get employment. But if globalization actually through technology usage and so on um, decrease the need for human resource. So why do we support yeah, globalization after all? Okay, so the reason is because the overall benefits is so much greater yeah, than the cost of individual workers or groups who have lost out. Jadi, no doubt that some people may have lost out, no job or kurang pekerjaan, but the overall benefits ataupun payoff itu sangat besar, ya, at least from the economic point of view. Right? Um, so globalization is like technological progress where both actually will disrupt ataupun membawa kesan ya to some livelihoods while enlarging the economic open GDP increase and so on and opening up new and better paying job opportunities. Jadi so in a way yeah technology also technical progress or technology can replace human labor at the same time globalization as well will also bring that same effect to the people in the country as well, right? So the internet, for example, made many jobs obsolete, but also created new high-paying jobs. Jadi maksudnya, um, so those people who there are certain group of people who may lose job because their skills are not required. But at the same time, there are more new jobs being created, which are higher paying jobs actually, yeah, gajinya lebih lumayan, and also industries which have never been heard before. So in other words, if you want to be successful, so the workers or the human resource in the country will need to be uh, upskill, perlu diberi latihan dan sebagainya for them to keep up yeah, with the kind of jobs in the future. Okay, right. So the reality is that in ideal world, displaced workers from trade competition could find new jobs and sometimes moving on or gaining new skills. So that's the nature of things. If you're not working now, you have to learn new skills, hoping that you will be able to get some job, better paying job in the future. So in reality, ini dari segi ideal world. In reality, dalam realitinya, it has been very difficult, yeah, for many of these workers. It's not as easy as what we say. Maknanya kalau kita tak ada kerja, kita improve our skill, and then we should be able to get new jobs or better improve our income and so on. But in reality, it is difficult for many of these workers on transition. Yeah. Okay, so this is also another empirical evidence, if you will, between 1950 and 2016 in the U.S. economy. Yeah? So the U.S. economy has increased its size to by 2.1 trillion. Kita tak pernah tengok pun trillion. I don't think we have billions but not trillion, right? In our economy, which is, for example, in terms of equivalent to 7,000 per person, ya, ataupun per household about 18,000 on average per household per year in terms of income. And this is the contribution, right? So the effect on U.S. manufacturing job, for example, 100,000 jobs gained every year, and at the same time, 200,000 jobs lost or moved elsewhere or replaced by other jobs every year. And out of the 4 million manufacturing job separations for all. Jadi perubahan yang menunjukkan as a result of globalization, um, that certain that things will change in terms of the nature of jobs or employment and so on. Okay, but this is the benefit, the overall benefit, in terms of US GDP, right? The ratio is 51 to 1 payoff to US GDP compared to wage losses of affected workers. Jadi memang diakui bahwa ianya membawa kesan kepada some workers, especially the low skill. Tapi the gain is so much, ya, uh, because it brings a lot of money, yeah, income to the country, right? So they think that the wage loss is only temporary, and later on perhaps things will overall they will get permanent job, yeah, as maybe training or reskilling dan sebagainya. Okay, so what about the? That's a good question to ask. Yeah, so I think you can start thinking about that. What happened to the developing countries? And this is the situation in the developed countries. Things are going to be a little bit different, if not drastically different from what is happening in the already developed countries in terms of the impact or the effects of globalization. All right, just quickly on this, on some of this content with globalization, why people are not satisfied with globalization. And the first thing is in terms of the outcomes, yeah, in terms of the outcomes. Uh, First of all, some people see, particularly in developing countries in Asia, for example, failures in development, right? Um, Latin America, for example, the growth was quite even in the 90s, half of what it was in earlier decades. Jadi ada pembangunan tidak seperti yang dijangkakan, ya. So benefits of growth uh, from the analysis seems to be going to the upper income groups and less to the lower income groups. So there was a growing poverty and unemployment, and also in certain countries, increasing crime rate as well. And then a growing fraction of population in informal sector, um, which without any job protections and so on. So those are indicators. Yeah? In Africa too, there was a decline in per capita income, and this is based on empirical data. Economists also in other countries, yeah, countries transitioning from communism to market. Now, one good example just now in dalam video tadi adalah negara Albania. Albania adalah merupakan negara former socialist country, ya, ataupun former communist country. So what was interesting dalam tu adalah there was no legal or lack of legal framework. Ya, contohnya kalau nak kawin pun, you have to get a new birth certificate. One birth certificate can only last for 9. So if you need another document untuk kerja ke, untuk to get a new job or whatever, then you have to go back to your hometown. That's the only place where you can get your birth certificate, right? And you have to do that every 90 days, setiap 3 bulan. Kalau I mean the document is only valid for 3 months. Okay, jadi itu yang menyebabkan Albania at one time was poor because of the system they have. Once they were lifted of communism, everything just changed, yeah, drastically. Okay, so all right, so transitioning from communism to market economy, given the inefficiencies of communism, so success, example tadi lah, Albania and also China is a good example. Transition, yeah, to the market economy. I wouldn't say it's easy, uh, but as far as China is concerned, they took a very short time to do that. Yeah? Um, because of the leadership, yeah, in the country. Yeah? Um, but in fact, yeah, there were massive decreases in income and also huge increases in poverty as well. Jadi ini dalam negara, ya. Jadi this is expectation, but in many countries it did not work. China is a great success story, lah. But other countries have tried or have not tried, um, because they just couldn't do it. Yeah, it doesn't work in this situation. Nevertheless, globalization had an important role in these failures. Ya, dari failure tadi adalah ada kaitan dengan globalisasi, di mana the inequality was predictable within the advanced industrial economies, where the effects on developing countries are slightly difficult to explain. Ya, jadi di negara yang sudah maju, it's quite easy, yeah, to see, but in developing countries, and this has to do with a lot of things, the social, cultural factors, yeah? And also because of unfair trade treaties between developed countries, yeah, also contributed to the problems of the developing countries as well. And unbalanced liberalization ataupun asymmetric liberalization also contribute to that. Right? Africa has neither, for example, has neither the resources nor the human resource ataupun education to take advantage of new opportunities. Tapi dalam video tadi, you could see actually the problem with nations in Africa. Yeah. All right. In America, pula, this is some example. Um, they followed the advice from IMF and also World Bank. In other words, they were the best student of Washington consensus policies. So the market capital liberalization more or less exposed them to huge volatility, and privatizations also contribute to ataupun were often corrupt. So jadi, although they were quick to adapt or to adopt rather, but things did not work quite well, yeah, in the system that they had. And contrast that between the transition countries from Washington consensus policies and China and Vietnam. So you could see this is taking place at a better apa nama yang berlaku di China and also Vietnam now. They're much better than what is happening in some of these Latin American countries. Yeah? So in Africa, another example, they were exploited, yeah, by the people, yeah, or by the West, or by the developed countries also. So they have the general problem becoming worse, and so they have been left without education, without technology, and also the resources, yeah, to take advantage of new opportunities. Jadi they are lagging behind lah, yeah. The African countries, they just do not have the resources in particular. Yeah? Although the wills of the people, memang mereka mau, tetapi keadaan tidak mengizinkan, ya, mereka. Yeah. So further problems, second problems is finance lah, ya, finance ataupun keuangan. There were a lot of crises in the last 30 years, which contributed to that. And also, money, instead of flowing from rich countries to poor countries, are actually flowing from the poor countries to rich countries. In other words, through globalization, um, the wealth or money is moving away from the poor countries to the rich countries. Okay, so in spite of advances in ability to slice or dice risk and so on, poor countries still bear brand of the risk, meaning that they are more burdened by huge debt. Itu satu hal. Debt ini adalah hutang ini adalah sebabkan mereka nak membangun, nak industrialize, tetapi tidak ada apa nama tu modal, so they have to borrow. And many of these project ataupun economic activities that they were doing based on the borrowing tadi tak jadi, ya. So if it doesn't work, then no profit, no benefits, right? So they cannot pay debt. Ya. Jadi itu menyebabkan debt problem. Okay, so that is one of the sources of the crisis in the particularly in many of these poor countries, many in Africa. Okay, and much of what globalization did was to protect investors' interests, little to protect the environment. So another issue is with regard to the protection of the environment as well. Mm. And also in terms of investment treaties, they are often one-sided, benefited the investor or rather the country who's invest, right? So poor countries have little way to protect themselves. And another problem is trade between the nations. And by the way, trade is the most important factor in terms of globalization, of course. Yeah. So international trade regime is unfair to most developing countries. And they have several rounds of meeting. Yeah, for example, the Uruguay round agenda was focused on the interests of the rich countries, even though in that meeting there were also concern about how the developing countries have not benefited and how the developing countries have to overcome problems of debt crisis and all that. Right, so the Uruguay round agenda focus on interest of the rich rather than the poor. Um, so in terms of services, for example, they provide that services but not skilled labor intensive services. In terms of subsidies also, do provide subsidies, ya, negara besar, negara maju, but not agriculture subsidies, which many of the poor countries are still dependent on. And also the issue of intellectual property rights, yeah, um, among developing nations. So the rights are still very much owned by, intellectual property rights are owned by the developed nations. Right? So most of the projected benefits goes to the rich countries. For example, 70% of the gains of trade, yeah, goes to developed countries, and also the 48 least developed countries were actually left worse than before they were engaged in international trade. So that is the situation. So in other words, the system is unbalanced, stacked against poor countries. So for example, the average Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD tariff goods from poor countries is 4 times higher than on goods for non-OECD countries. In other words, that's unfair trade barriers. Yeah. So rich countries cost poor countries three times more in terms of section than their total development system. Jadi masalah tidak memihak ataupun the benefit tidak memihak kepada negara miskin. And also little progress on agriculture issues as well. Contohnya OECD countries continue to subsidize agriculture by 48% of total farm production, yeah, which is just 3% lower than 1986. So they maintain high tariff, yeah, on agriculture. So there was a need for development round again to address this problem, but the development round ataupun meeting ini mesyuarat lah ya, world meeting among world leaders. Round, according to this writer, the round agenda was mostly putting all wine. Apa maksudnya? Putting all wine in new bottles. Benda yang sama, tetapi package baru terus. Ya. So some elements of it were even anti-development. Ya, tidak dari segi pembangunan. Okay, so another thing is that the US and also European Union promise to do their best, to help, but they back down or they renege on that, on their promises. So they, at the end of the day, they didn't do it, yeah, to help the poor countries, right? So the development round actually ataupun meeting ini doesn't help and do not deserve to be called development round after all, right? And even if it is successfully completed, um, this round would do little to benefit developing countries for many reasons. Yeah, number one, problem was not just in terms of agriculture. As I said, many of the developing countries are still doing that, and also in terms of manufacturing, the rate of tariffs yang dikenakan oleh negara yang sudah maju ke atas produk exported to developed countries, for example. So that is a disadvantage. Also, U.S. refusal to go along the opening up to poorest countries, yeah, poorest countries. In other words, EBP, everything but what you produce, yeah. They don't open their market, okay? And also other non-tariff barriers lah, macam-macam jenis halangan lain daripada tariff. One could be in terms of environmental issue, right? They don't want to buy the product, for example. And that's the issue with the oil palm that we have, or palm oil rather, that we have in Malaysia. We are facing problem with the European Union. It has nothing to do with the tariff, but also one of the reasons why they don't import or refuse to import oil or palm oil is because of issue of environment. That is, they claim that production of palm oil is at the expense of the environment. You have to cut down trees and so on, forests. Okay? And also another risk if it is completed, they believe that there was a development round, it can return to earlier regime. Yeah. So earlier regime meaning those who were in power before, right? So that may uh, encourage former regime to take over power. If it fails, then it would mean that there is continuous bilateral trade agreements, even more unfair to the developing countries, and also it helps to undermine multilateral trading system if it fails. Yeah? So it's a lot of dilemma actually. Yeah. And another problem is in terms of knowledge. Knowledge gap between the developed and less developed countries. So one of the main problems facing developing countries is reducing gap in terms of knowledge. Yeah, but in terms of also in terms of intellectual property, it has been remained unbalanced, which makes it very very difficult. Yeah? So and that makes access to life-saving medicines also more difficult. Yeah. So and also developing countries have to have oriented intellectual property regime as well. Right, so that is the knowledge pun perbezaan, so it is an advantage to the developed nations. Another, but less talk about is the effect of globalization on global warming. Yeah, this is another arena in which global social injustice being played out. Okay, so in fact, the major source of pollution has been from the north and from the developed countries, but the major consequences have been in the south, in other words, in the less developed countries. Jadi, so the blame, you know, for the global warming actually is um, because of development in the developed countries. Tapi yang mendapat kesannya adalah negara-negara lain ya yang ramah. Okay, so other values dominated by economics in terms of this contain, for example, environment sacrifice for short-term commercial interest, for example, ya. So um, uh, the interest ataupun untuk mendapat keuntungan ya dalam masa yang pendek ya at the environment and also reduce access to life-saving medicines among developing countries. Also, no compensation provided to developing countries for environmental services. I mean, when we follow their suggestion and all that, yeah, from the developed countries, we're not being compensated for that. Yeah, they're happy if we do it. If we don't do it, I mean, if we don't do it, they will be angry. Yeah, but if we do it, there's no compensation. Okay, so in terms of biodiversity and also in looking at the process of carbon dioxide removal ataupun carbon sequestration, yeah, so these things. Yeah? So if you do that, there is no compensation, tak ada ganjaran dan sebagainya. Yeah? And also some countries are, or some people are concerned about the protection of traditional knowledge, and it does seems like globalization doesn't address that issue. Yeah? And okay, what else? Traditional cultures also are weakened because of globalization, and the World Trade Organization also make it worse. Yeah, the rules made by the World Trade Organization makes it difficult to support as well. Okay, so overall, the democratic process is undermined by uh, by globalization. Yeah, for example, the conditions set by IMF, for example, yeah, really undermines the democratic process. Right. So looking at the process, discontent ataupun dissatisfaction rather with globalization in terms of the process whereby the global governance is undemocratic. Yeah, because this is talking about globalization, so there is uh, terms like global governance. In other words, one system of government or governance for all. Yeah, so that has been undemocratic. What we mean by that is that they don't really listen to the voice of the developing countries, and also even if they heard it, uh, uh, even if they heard it, it is not listened to. Jadi hearing and listening is two different things lah, right? So you hear but you don't take action ataupun you don't pay attention to. That's what is happening. So governance also has been global governance has been dominated by the north, by the developed countries, and also by special interest groups. Right? So rules are made by advanced nation for advanced nation. Yeah. So then don't make rules for all countries. In other words, yeah. So they are having the rules for their interests or for special interest within them. That's the discontent ataupun dissatisfaction in terms of the process of globalization. And also the problems of global governance also highlighted by problems of the World Bank and also IMF. Jadi itu in terms of what is being faced nowadays. Um, so bad governance or governance problem contribute to bad outcome. Right? So the issue is adalah untuk how do we improve the governance. Yeah? So failures of global governance also affect the failures in democracy. So this is more to politics um, within the advanced industrial countries. Yeah. So special interests are dominating national interests, for example, and also problems. Yeah. Um, of the developing countries, um, even among those ministers, trade ministers, when they meet, they decide on trade issues, but have no or little attention paid to the environment and also the health consequences. And that's the smokestack structure they were talking about. So this is quite different from the way decisions are made within the country ataupun dalam negara. So when ministers from different countries meet, they uh, forget about issue dalaman, for example, yeah, issue environment, issue kesehatan sebagainya. The more to issue of trade in terms of economic benefits. Yeah. Okay, uh, so in a way, it has undermined democracy, um, and a lot because of the conditions that were set. Yeah, a lot of limitations, a lot of constraints they put out there, and then also a reduction in terms of the scope of democratic decision making. As I said, because this is more or less dominated by the powerful nations. Yeah, jadi small nation, less developed nation have very little say. Right? Okay, so this is Joseph Stiglitz in year 2007, um, more or less summarize, yeah, what globalization is, yeah. So globalization, according to him, has made us in the world more interdependent, and greater interdependence means greater need for collective action to act cooperatively. That's the way it should be, yeah. But just as the world has greater need for global economic institutions, confidence in the institution has waned ataupun telah berkurangan. Right? So it is the institutions, yeah, global economic institutions. A lot of people have little confidence, yeah, or growing, winning confidence in this institution. Yeah. Okay, so the fundamental problem of this is just something else that I came up with. Yeah. In other words, economic globalization has actually outpaced political globalization. It is happening faster, yeah, than the changes in terms of the politics and all that. Yeah. So democracies have learned how to temper the market economy to make sure that most individuals benefit from it, but we have not yet learned how to temper the excesses of globalization. How do we deal with that excess of globalization impact? Yeah, it has more or less put new demands on the nation state. As that, one of which is the growing inequality, reduced ability to respond on the part of the developing countries. This is part of the reason why we have not democratized globalization. Yeah. All right. So, how many more do I have on this slide? Some of the negative impacts of countries. One is poverty. Right. So instead of reducing poverty, it has, according to some of the reports, the negative impacts of globalization is the increase in developing countries. And I think you can see this from the videos now. Yeah? So Kofi Annan, for example, a former United Nations Secretary General, stated that at present only a relatively small number of countries are enjoying these gains of globalization. Many millions of people are excluded or left behind in squalor. Squalor itu maksudnya keadaan kotor, keadaan kemiskinan dan sebagainya. Ya. So globalization leads to wealth redistribution. Right? So what actually has done is um, it's supposed to it has more or less enrich countries globally, but increase local poverty. Yeah, jadi this is the situation. So it makes rich countries, the industrialized nations particularly, become richer, and the poor nations, the developing countries, to become poorer. Right? This is background. The agreement by Bowman and back in 1977. So there is increasing dependence, yeah, among countries, um, particularly the less developed countries. They have become heavily dependent on the wealth of the developed nations as a result. And also, as we have mentioned earlier on, if I mentioned earlier on, also has been a record of increasing debt accumulation among the poor countries as a result of importation or buying goods and services from the developed countries. So they buy goods from developed countries and they spend money, but they cannot export much of their goods to the developed countries in return. Okay, so the rest are there's some additional notes that I have on economic globalization. Um, so it's based on the way globalization has been managed, right? There has not much of uh, benefits. Yeah. So economic values has been dominating other values. Yeah. So for example, social and cultural values has been, or even environmental values have been neglected, and also undemocratic processes has been ongoing. Yeah. And to the particular set of ideologies that have underlay politics as well. So market fundamentalism, for example, yeah, um, and in developing countries, the Washington consensus policies have not been effective, right, compared to at least in some of these countries has not proven to be effective. Okay, so what are the reforms that need to be done? Make globalization work better for developing countries. Number one is in terms of trade, there is a need for true development round. Yeah. In other words, a drastic transformation needs to be there. For example, if the developed world is willing to commit 7% of GDP to help the poor countries, yeah, shouldn't they help them also by opening up their markets? And that's the main issue. Yeah. With globalization now, the developed countries are not opening up their market to the developing countries' product. Okay. So there is a need to open up market to countries poorer and smaller. And then for more policy scope, we should allow developing countries to do what developed countries did, yeah, to advance their development. Yeah. So should not be control in that sense. Yeah. Um, also the differences in terms of consequences of subsidies. Um, some have greater impact and some have less impact of subsidies, asymmetrical, tak sama, unbalanced. So a true development round should be for labor market liberalization, as well capital market liberalization, and also focus on agriculture as well, in terms of subsidies, um, and escalating tariffs is also another issue that needs to be dealt with. The non-tariff barriers also need to be reduced, and so the concern about development-oriented intellectual property regime. So these are issues that need to be dealt with. Yeah. So otherwise, it will continue to only benefit ataupun bias against the less developed country. Okay. So the need for definitely need for global financial reforms, the issue of debt relief, the reform of the international reserve system, for example, need to be there, giving more opportunities that will benefit the developing countries, yeah, um, either through loans ataupun hard currency, uh, right? In other words, the foreign aid they receive, yeah, it's not benefit much, from the donor country. Then also the issue of environmental responsibility, right? So doing bilateral investment treaties, also, and in other words, other legal obligations need to be enforced through international commercial courts, and redoing bilateral investment treaties in terms of limiting the scope and no longer enforced to commercial scope and so on. Yeah? Okay, so global competition, which are enforced through international competition authority, um, um, to help poor countries, and also to escape the resource curse, they call it, to expand the extractive industries initiative so that only transparent payment tax are deductible. Yeah. Um, should end also abusive bank secrecy. In other words, there should be more transparency, in terms of the bank transactions, and also what I call this interest and so on. Okay, so in terms of foreign assistance, more of it should be given, and more so that, and also to be more effective. Yeah? Assistance has played an important role, in the past, and can play even greater role in the future as well. Right? So especially with programs which are based on success stories of the East Asia, America, seperti Korea, seperti Taiwan, and even China now, and providing more country ownership as well. Okay, jadi Japan is one good example, and I will not go. It has been highlighted in the video just now why Japan was successful, yeah, in terms of its economy, how it has transformed. All right. So in terms of some of the positive and negative impact of globalization, you can see from here. There's a gain in terms of technological innovation. Of course, there's a positive. Foreign direct investment is also a positive. And then also contribute in terms of scale. But the negatives are in terms of interdependence, a growing interdependence between developing and developed countries, and also the issue of threat to sovereignty of the country atau kedalautan, of the country, and also inequitable distribution of income. Yeah, so this ada some negative. Yeah, while the impact is supposed to bring greater benefits to all countries, but within the country there seems to be not only that, but not only within the country, but also some of the poor countries continue to be left behind. Jadi inequalities between developed or rich countries and poor countries. Okay, so the bottom line about globalization. Globalization has impacted nearly every aspect of our modern life and continues to be growing, yeah, in years, yeah, to come. So while there are a few drawbacks ataupun masalah yang dihadapi ataupun berkaitan dengan globalisasi, most economists agree that it is a force that's both unstoppable, tak boleh dihalang, and the net benefits to the world economy. Jadi ianya akan berlaku dan akan membawa kebaikan atau keuntungan kepada the world economy. We're talking about global economy, not individual countries' economy. Yeah? And there have always been periods of protectionism in terms of trade and all that, yeah, and nationalism in the past, but globalization continues to be the most widely accepted solution to ensuring consistent economic growth around the world. So that's more or less summarized um, on the issue of globalization and how it uh, contribute to or lack of contribution to the uh, economy of different countries of the world. Jadi dengan itu saja sampai presentation untuk petang ini. Right? This one is the same video tadi lah yang saya tayangkan ya sebentar tadi. Okay, any questions or comments?
Yeah, bro.
Letih ya?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Even you sitting down and listening also letih. Saya yang bercakap banyak pun sangat-sangat letih. Okay. Anyway, what I'm trying to um, impart to you ataupun share with you today is more or less looking at globalization and how it is supposed to help uh, countries throughout the world to also develop and enjoy the benefits of growth. Tetapi apa yang kita nampak adalah bukan semua negara dapat membangun ataupun develop at the same pace ataupun at the same rate. Yeah, some countries are still left behind because of certain things. So you need, the first thing that you can think of is that when you talk about communication as a means for globalization ataupun for capitalism or whatnot, the country first of all must have the infrastructure. Okay, infrastructure contohnya the telecommunication, yeah, infrastructure. People are now talking about 5Gs and all that. Yeah, US are lagging behind China and so on, but they can do that. Yeah? But poor countries they just don't have the means to do that. Itu yang masalahnya. Right? Nevertheless, globalization has impacted the world secara umumnya and has brought a lot of benefits. No doubt there are also um, reservation ataupun some negative impacts of globalization. Okay, so let me stop the sharing. So itu sajalah dari saya. Kalau ada soalan, komen, you can voice it now ataupun you want to reserve for later time pun okay. All right.
Okay, Prof.
I wanted to share actually the assignment, but I will do that maybe I'll put it up later on, and then we'll discuss about the second assignment next week. The second assignment is an assignment for you to make a video. Yeah. So it's not a written assignment; it's a video, more like presentation, actually. Yeah.
Sure,
So
doctor.
yeah. So we'll talk about talk more about that later on. Okay.
Thank you, Prof.
All right.
Okay, Prof. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
Prof.
you, Prof.
Yeah.
Have a
Thank
nice
you,
day.
Prof.
Thank you,
Thank
Prof.
you, Prof.
It's been very
Okay,
long.
Prof. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prof.
Selamat berbuka puasa kepada yang berbuka puasa nanti.
Okay.
And stay safe, ya. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you, Prof. Take care and stay safe.
Yeah, Prof.
Okay.
Kau mesti biar tak?
See you next week, ya.